In a sunlit park filled with children's laughter, no one expected to witness the unthinkable. When a uniformed police officer raised his hand against an 8-year-old girl in a wheelchair, he didn't know one crucial detail. Her father was an FBI agent. What followed would shake a city to its core and ignite a movement that couldn't be silenced. This isn't just another story of police misconduct. It's a father's fury, a child's courage, and a community's awakening that would change everything. Watch as justice unfolds in ways no one saw coming. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. This is a story you won't want to miss. Your voice matters in the fight for change. The summer festival buzzed with life at City Park that Saturday afternoon. Children's laughter mixed with carnival music, while the sweet scent of cotton candy danced on the warm breeze. Among the festive crowd, 8-year-old Sarah Bennett steered her bright blue wheelchair through the maze of families and food stalls, her chair decorated with colorful superhero stickers that matched her unstoppable spirit. Sarah had never let her cerebral palsy define her. She faced the world with unflinching courage and a smile that could outshine the summer sun above. Her father Nathan's words echoed in her mind. "You're not different, Sarah. You're extraordinary." From a nearby bench, Nathan watched his daughter navigate toward the playground, his coffee cooling in his hands. As an FBI agent, he'd witnessed humanity's darkest moments, but Sarah's determination had always been his light in the darkness. Today was meant to be their perfect father-daughter day at the festival. But perfection shattered as Sarah approached the playground entrance. There, blocking her path, stood a uniformed police officer, his face twisted with an expression that had no place at a children's festival. His fist clenched, rising slowly into the air. Sarah looked up at him, fear mixing with defiance in her young eyes. None of the witnesses could have predicted what would happen next. At the playground entrance stood Officer Marcus Sullivan, a man whose badge had become more of a shield for his cruelty than a symbol of protection. His reputation for aggression preceded him, sending ripples of unease through the community wherever he went. When his eyes locked onto Sarah, something dark flickered across his face. He deliberately stepped into her path, transforming from an officer of the law into an immovable barrier of malice. "Excuse me, sir." Sarah's voice wavered but remained polite, her small hands gripping her wheelchair's wheels as she tried to navigate around him. Thompson shifted again, trapping her like a predator cornering its prey. "Get out of the way, you little brat." His words sliced through the festive air, dripping with contempt. The carnival music faded to a distant hum as fear crept into Sarah's chest. Her bright smile dissolved into confusion as she attempted to back away, the gravel fighting against her wheels. "I just wanted to play," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the festival noise. "You don't belong here," Thompson snarled, looming closer, his shadow engulfing her like an approaching storm. His prejudice pierced Sarah's innocent world with surgical precision. Across the park, Nathan's instincts flared. His trained FBI eyes caught the confrontation, recognizing his daughter's distinctive blue wheelchair. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers as cold dread seized his heart. He broke into a sprint, but he was too far, much too far. In one brutal moment, Thompson's hand whipped through the air, striking Sarah's cheek with a crack that silenced the entire park. The sound hung in the air like a gunshot, drawing gasps from the crowd. Sarah's small hand flew to her face, tears welling in her shocked eyes. Time crystallized. The festival froze. Parents clutched their children closer as phones emerged from pockets, documenting the unthinkable. Nathan reached his daughter, just as the first tear rolled down her reddening cheek, mixing with the mark of Thompson's cruelty. And in that moment, something in Nathan snapped. A fury unlike anything he'd ever known began to rise. Nathan's blood boiled as he planted himself between his daughter and Thompson, becoming a shield of barely contained fury. His FBI training battled with his paternal rage as he faced down the uniformed attacker. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Nathan's voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. His eyes, hard as steel, locked onto Thompson's, and for the first time, the officer's arrogance wavered. "Stay out of this," Thompson barked back, but his bravado rang hollow. The crowd had turned against him, their whispers crescendoing into shouts of outrage. More phones appeared, documenting every second of his downfall. Behind Nathan, Sarah's quiet sobs tore at his heart. He glanced back at his little girl, trembling in her wheelchair, the red mark on her cheek a testament to Thompson's cruelty. In that moment, Nathan made a silent vow. "You think you can hurt my daughter and just walk away?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, each word carrying the weight of a promise. "I swear you'll pay for this. I will make sure you do." Fear finally cracked Thompson's facade as realization dawned. He hadn't just struck any child. He'd assaulted an FBI agent's daughter. Before he could respond, police sirens pierced the air, their wail heralding the arrival of other officers rushing to contain the powder keg the festival had become. "You have no idea what you've just done," Nathan growled, his protective stance unwavering. His FBI training merged with his father's fury, creating something formidable. "You think you can strike an innocent child and walk away? Not today. Not ever." Thompson's composure crumbled as the weight of the crowd's judgment pressed down on him. Every phone captured his dissent, recording each flicker of doubt that crossed his face. His sneer faltered as panic began to set in, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Officer Marcus Sullivan started to back away. "Back off!" Thompson's command cracked like a brittle twig, his raised hand trembling as he tried to reclaim control. But he was facing a man who had stared down hardened criminals, who had navigated threats far deadlier than a playground bully with a badge. Nathan closed the gap between them, his voice dropping to an arctic whisper meant for Thompson's ears alone. "You don't know who I am, do you? But you're going to learn. And when I'm done, you'll wish you'd never laid a hand on my daughter." The blood drained from Thompson's face as recognition finally dawned. The steel in Nathan's eyes wasn't just a father's rage. It was the calculated fury of a federal agent who knew exactly how to deliver justice. The approaching sirens crescendoed as two squad cars screeched to a halt nearby. Officers poured out, instinctively moving to shield their colleague, creating a thin blue line that only heightened the crowd's anger. One officer's hand drifted to his holster, his voice tense. "What's going on here?" Nathan inhaled deeply, wrestling his fury into something controlled, precise. He gestured toward Sarah, whose tears glinted in the sunlight, her cheeks still branded by Thompson's handprint. "What's going on is that this officer attacked my disabled daughter without provocation. I want to know why." The responding officers exchanged uncomfortable glances as Thompson fumbled for justification. "She was obstructing the path," he stammered, his excuse withering in the summer heat. The crowd erupted. "That justifies hitting a child? She's just a little girl." Their collective outrage swelled into a tsunami of voices, forcing the officers to step back. Nathan seized the moment, his voice cutting through the chaos with practiced authority. "Everyone here witnessed it," he declared, gesturing to the forest of phones still recording. "They saw you strike a child without cause. Now you're trying to justify it?" His eyes locked onto Thompson's. "There's no excuse for what you did, and you will be held accountable. Justice for Sarah! Justice for Sarah!" The chant ignited like wildfire, spreading through the crowd until it thundered across the park. The officers shifted uneasily as their grip on control slipped away, the narrative no longer theirs to shape. Nathan dropped to one knee beside Sarah, his fierce expression melting in a tender concern as he gently wiped her tears away. She collapsed into his embrace, her small frame shaking against his chest. "It's okay, baby. I'm here," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I won't let him hurt you again." Sarah nodded against him, but the fear lingering in her eyes tore at his heart. Their sunlit afternoon had shattered, innocence giving way to a harsh lesson about the world's darker corners. Yet, as the crowd's voices united around them, Nathan felt something unexpected bloom amid his rage: hope. These strangers had become witnesses, advocates, a community refusing to look away from injustice. The responding officers, reading the shifting winds, moved to take Thompson into custody, if only to defuse the powder keg the park had become. As they led him away, Thompson shot one last defiant glare at Nathan and Sarah, a hollow attempt to cling to his fractured authority. Nathan met his stare unflinchingly, his eyes carrying a promise that made Thompson's glare waver. "You'll answer for this," Nathan called after him, each word weighted with the certainty of coming consequences. As Thompson disappeared into the patrol car and the crowd began to disperse, the festival's cheerful music seemed to mock the gravity of what had transpired. But Nathan knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The festival's cheer had evaporated, but something heavier remained. Parents held their children closer, eyeing the remaining officers with newfound wariness. Trust, once broken, leaves lasting cracks. One by one, witnesses approached Nathan, offering their support and video evidence, each interaction strengthening his resolve. "Thank you," he managed, emotion thickening his voice. But this was just the opening move in a longer game. Nathan turned back to Sarah, her eyes still swimming with tears. He gentled his expression, fingers brushing through her hair. "We're going to fight this, Sarah. I promise you. We won't let him get away with what he did." Sarah nodded, her small hands gripping her wheelchair's frame. Though fear still shadowed her face, something else flickered in her eyes. The first spark of resilience, born from knowing she wasn't standing alone. As the day died around them, Nathan carefully lifted Sarah from her wheelchair, cradling her into the car's back seat. His gentle movements contrasted sharply with the storm still raging inside him. He secured her seatbelt with practiced care, each click a reminder of what he was fighting for. They drove home through streets painted gold by the setting sun, long shadows stretching before them like the path ahead. Nathan knew the battle looming before them would be hard-fought. But as he glanced at Sarah in the rearview mirror, he felt his determination crystallize. This wasn't just about one incident or one officer. This was about every person who had ever suffered at the hands of those meant to protect them. The fight had begun, and Nathan Bennett, FBI agent and father, was ready to see it through to the end. Nathan knew this fight stretched beyond Sarah's bruised cheek. It would be a battle for the change their community had long needed. A father's fury transformed into an unstoppable force for justice. The morning after brought an unsettling quiet to the Thompson household, but across the digital landscape, a storm was raging. Videos of Officer Marcus Sullivan striking Sarah had ignited social media. The footage, the assault, Nathan's confrontation, the crowd's unified chants for justice, spread like wildfire, transforming their local tragedy into a national conversation about police brutality and accountability. At his kitchen table, Nathan scrolled through an endless stream of notifications. Reporters, activists, and strangers worldwide reached out, their messages flooding his phone. Upstairs, Sarah finally slept, though the mark on her cheek remained, a visual testament to yesterday's horror. Every time Nathan closed his eyes, the scene replayed. Sarah's face twisted in fear, Thompson's hand raised in hatred. The memory stoked the fire in his chest, hardening his resolve into steel. He'd already contacted Michelle Park, a civil rights attorney he knew from his FBI days. They planned to file more than just a complaint. This wasn't about one officer's violence anymore. This was about dismantling a system that allowed someone like Thompson to wear a badge at all. Among the flood of messages, one stood out, an invitation to speak at a rally organized by local advocacy groups. They wanted Sarah's story to become the catalyst for departmental reform. Nathan's finger hesitated over the screen, knowing that stepping into the spotlight would paint a target on his back. Then he remembered Sarah's eyes, filled with absolute trust in his promise of justice. His thumbs moved across the phone with certainty, typing his response. 2 days later, Nathan stood on the City Hall steps, facing a sea of faces that stretched across the square. Hundreds had gathered, their signs rising like a forest of protest. Justice for Sarah and end police brutality. The air crackled with shared outrage and determination. His heart hammered against his ribs, but Nathan pushed his nerves aside. This moment transcended personal fear. As he approached the microphone, silence fell over the crowd. News cameras tracked his every move, their lenses capturing what was about to become more than just a local story. He'd prepared remarks, but looking out at the crowd, Nathan knew this required raw truth, not polished words. "My name is Nathan Bennett," he began, his voice steady yet weighted with emotion. I am an FBI agent, a member of this community, and most importantly, a father. 2 days ago, my 8-year-old daughter Sarah was attacked. Attacked by someone who wore a badge meant to protect her. A ripple of anger moved through the crowd. Nathan paused, letting the weight of his words settle. This isn't just about what happened to Sarah, he continued, gripping the podium. This is about a system that allows people like Officer Marcus Sullivan to act without consequences. A system that sees our children as threats instead of human beings. He drew a deep breath, his voice gaining strength. I made a promise to my daughter. I promised her this wouldn't go unanswered. Today, I'm asking you to stand with us. To demand accountability. To demand change. The crowd erupted, their cheers bouncing off the surrounding buildings like thunder. Looking out at the faces before him, families, activists, community leaders, Nathan felt hope surge in his chest. This wasn't his lonely crusade anymore. It had become their fight too. As other speakers took the stage, sharing their own stories of injustice and calling for police reform, Nathan knew change was coming. The rally's energy lingered in the city's bones long after the crowds dispersed. Change rippled through the streets like an unstoppable tide. Local news stations played the footage of Thompson's attack on an endless loop, each replay stoking the public's fury. FBI agent demands justice for disabled daughter's assault, the headline screamed. Community rises against police brutality. The story caught fire nationally, dragging decades of unchecked police misconduct into the harsh light of public scrutiny. Under the white-hot glare of media attention, the police department scrambled. They announced Thompson's administrative leave and an internal investigation, but their words rang hollow. Too little, too late. Nathan's phone buzzed constantly with messages from across the country. Some shared similar stories of abuse, others offered support, but all demanded the same thing: accountability, reform, justice. The community's response transcended mere protest. Local shops transformed into beacons of solidarity, their windows declaring, "We stand with Sarah," in bold letters. Each evening, families filled the streets in candlelight vigils, their flames pushing back the darkness of indifference. Every night, Nathan and Sarah would watch the coverage together on their living room couch. Though the footage still made her flinch, a new strength had begun to replace her fear. One evening, as they watched another report about the growing movement, Sarah looked up at her father, her voice soft but steady. "Will it change, Daddy?" she whispered. In her eyes, Nathan saw not just hope, but the first glimmers of something more powerful, the awareness that her pain had sparked a revolution. "I don't know how long it will take, sweetie," Nathan answered, squeezing Sarah's small hand in his, "but I know we're going to fight for it. And we're not alone." As the investigation into Thompson's actions deepened, witness testimonies flooded in. Nathan's lawyer, Sarah, compiled statement after statement, each one adding another damning stroke to the portrait of Thompson's brutality. For years, similar voices have been silenced, their pain buried under paperwork and procedure. But not this time. The higher the case's profile rose, the darker the opposition grew. Anonymous threats slipped into Nathan's inbox, warning him to back down, to stop stirring up trouble. But each threat only hardened his resolve. This wasn't just Sarah's fight anymore. It was for every child who'd ever been made to feel powerless against a badge. One evening, as he sorted through another batch of threatening messages, his phone rang. A local activist group wanted him to spearhead a broader police reform movement in their city. Nathan's eyes drifted to the stairs leading to Sarah's room, where she slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. He'd never seen himself as an activist, but sometimes destiny chooses your path for you. The morning of the trial arrived with a biting chill, nature itself seeming to hold its breath. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered in waves, their signs slicing through the morning mist: "Justice for Sarah" and "End police brutality." The entire city seemed to pause, waiting to see if the system could actually deliver the justice it promised. Inside the courthouse, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The courtroom's polished wood benches felt hard as stone under Nathan as he sat rigid, hands clasped until his knuckles whitened. Beside him, Sarah seemed impossibly small against the austere backdrop, her presence a reminder of everything at stake. The marks on her cheek had faded, but Nathan knew the invisible scars ran deeper than skin. Across the aisle, Marcus Sullivan's arrogance had crumbled like a sand castle at high tide. His darting eyes betrayed his fear as they bounced between the cameras, reporters, and the faces of those who'd come to witness justice in action. His lawyer's urgent whispers seemed to fall on deaf ears as Thompson confronted the reality of his situation. The room rose as Judge Reynolds entered, her presence bringing a weight of possibility. Would today finally break the cycle of impunity? Prosecutor Diana Martinez commanded the courtroom from her first breath, her voice sharp as a surgeon's blade. "This case is not just about one officer's actions," she declared, fixing the jury with an unwavering gaze. "It's about the abuse of power, about every citizen's right to feel safe in their community. Sarah Bennett was not safe, and that is why we are here today." The jury leaned forward, their faces etched with attention. Nathan studied them, knowing these 12 strangers held not just Sarah's future, but the possibility of real change in their hands. The first witness, Robert Patel, took the stand. His voice trembled with righteous anger as he recounted that day in the park. "There was no reason for it," he testified, his eyes locked on the jury. "She was just a little girl, and he hit her like she was some kind of threat." The defense attorney's attempts to discredit him crashed against Chin's certainty like waves against a cliff. "I know what I saw," he insisted, steel entering his voice. "And so did everyone else." As more witnesses stepped forward, parents, teenagers, a shop owner from across the street, the truth emerged like a rising tide. The evidence mounted like an unstoppable tide. Each testimony added another brushstroke to the damning portrait, while the bystander videos played on courtroom screens. Thompson's towering figure, his hand striking Sarah, the sound crackling through speakers like a gunshot in church. Thompson's defense withered by the hour. His lawyer grasped at straws, painting a picture of a stressed officer making a momentary mistake. Should his entire career be destroyed over one lapse in judgment? The lawyer pleaded, desperation seeping through his practiced tone. But Prosecutor Ruiz was ready. She approached Thompson on the stand like a lioness closing in on prey, each question precise as a surgeon's cut. "Officer Thompson," she began, her voice sharp enough to slice paper, "did you feel threatened by an 8-year-old girl in a wheelchair?" Thompson squirmed under the fluorescent lights. I thought she might cause trouble." The park was crowded. "By striking a child?" Ruiz cut in, her eyebrows arched. "Is that what you believe your duty entails?" A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged knowing glances, their faces hardening. When Nathan took the stand, the air seemed to thicken. Sarah watched from her bench, her small hands gripping the wood, her face set with quiet strength. Nathan caught Marcus's eye for a moment before turning to the jury. "I'm an FBI agent," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I've seen humanity at its worst in my line of work. But I never imagined I'd watch my own daughter being attacked by someone sworn to protect her." His voice grew stronger with each word. "I'll never forget the look on her face in that moment. Because that's when she learned that the people we teach our children to trust can sometimes be the ones who hurt them the most." The courtroom fell into profound silence, his words hanging in the air like thunder before a storm. Nathan's testimony hung in the courtroom like a physical presence. Sarah's tears glistened in the fluorescent light, but he forced himself to stay strong. This moment wasn't just for her, but for every child who deserved better. In her closing argument, Diana Martinez's voice filled the chamber with quiet thunder. "Sarah Bennett is not a threat. She is a child whose only crime was wanting to play in a park like any other child. But Officer Thompson saw her differently, as less than human, as someone he could harm without consequence. Today, we ask you to show him, and the system that enabled him, that such actions will not stand." Thompson's lawyer made his final plea for leniency, his words hollow as autumn leaves. The jury's faces remained unreadable, carved from stone. After hours that felt like years, they returned. The foreman stood, paper trembling slightly in his hand. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Marcus Sullivan, guilty on all charges." The courtroom released its collective breath. Nathan's hand found Sarah's, and she squeezed back with surprising strength. When he looked down, he saw something precious blooming on her face. A smile, small but real, like the first flower after winter. As Thompson was led away, his authority stripped bare, he cast one final glance at Nathan and Sarah. His eyes held no defiance now. Only the dull acceptance of accountability finally served. Outside, the crowd's cheers rolled through the streets like thunder. Nathan held Sarah close in the warm sunlight, feeling the weight of change in the air. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The weeks that followed brought a whirlwind of transformation. As Thompson's sentencing approached, calls for police reform echoed through city halls. But for Nathan and Sarah, the real victories happened in quiet moments. Watching Sarah slowly reclaim her confidence, seeing her smile return, brighter than before. In her daily victories, wheeling herself back to the park, joining other children at play, finding her voice again, Nathan saw the true meaning of justice. Sarah, once afraid to leave her room, had become living proof that change was possible, that healing could follow harm, that justice could prevail. In the weeks that followed, Nathan watched Sarah reclaim her world piece by piece. Each venture to the park, each laugh with friends, felt like a small victory. But he couldn't miss the shadows that still flickered behind her eyes. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. One evening, as sunset painted their porch in amber hues, they sat together in comfortable silence. The breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the sounds of a city still wrestling with change. Sarah's voice, when it came, was soft but steady, like a butterfly testing its wings. "Daddy," she said, breaking the peaceful moment, "do you think things are really going to get better?" Nathan studied his daughter's face, seeing both hope and uncertainty dancing in her eyes. He wanted to wrap her in promises of a perfect world, one where no child would ever face what she had. But their journey had taught them both the value of truth. "I think it's going to be hard, Sarah," he answered carefully, choosing honesty over comfort. "But I believe we've already made a difference. And if we keep fighting, things will get better, not just for us, but for everyone." She nodded, absorbing his words with a wisdom beyond her years, then leaned her head against his shoulder. Together they watched the stars emerge, finding peace in the simple act of being. The day of Thompson's sentencing arrived with the weight of finality. The courtroom felt different now. Gone was the nervous energy of the trial, replaced by quiet determination. Nathan and Sarah sat surrounded by their newfound family of activists, supporters, and community members who'd stood with them through it all. Thompson shuffled in, shackled and subdued. His formerly proud stance had crumbled, leaving behind a shell of the man who'd once terrorized a child. As he passed their row, barely lifting his eyes, Nathan felt an unexpected flicker of pity, not for the officer who'd struck his daughter, but for someone who'd let hatred poison his soul so completely. The judge's sentence rang through the courtroom like a bell-tolling change. A significant prison term for Thompson's abuse of power and assault. The relief that washed over Nathan wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability, finally piercing the shield of a badge. "We did it, Sarah," Nathan whispered as the gavel fell. "We kept our promise." Sarah looked up at him, tears gleaming but unspent. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered back. "For everything." Change rippled through the city like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The police department instituted reforms, mandatory sensitivity training, independent oversight committees, new accountability measures. Not perfect, but a beginning. One afternoon, Nathan returned home to find Sarah surrounded by art supplies, working on what had started as a school project, but grown into something more. "Stand up for what's right," declared her poster in bold letters. "Do you think this will help, Daddy?" she asked, holding up her work. "I want to share my story with my class. I want them to know it's okay to speak up, even when it's hard." Nathan's throat tightened as he knelt beside her. "It's perfect, Sarah, and it's going to make a difference, just like you have." As autumn painted the city in gold and crimson, they returned to the park where it had all begun. Sarah rolled confidently down the path she'd once feared, past children whose laughter now filled the air again. Near the swings, they paused at a small plaque installed by the community, in recognition of all who stand for justice. Sarah traced the letters with gentle fingers, a smile playing at her lips. "Do you like it?" Nathan asked. "It means a lot," she replied, her eyes bright. "It means what happened, it mattered. That people cared." Nathan pulled her close as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. They had walked through darkness and emerged carrying light. The shadows hadn't vanished completely. They never do, but they had learned to face them together, never alone. That summer day had changed more than just a little girl's life. It had become a catalyst for an entire community's awakening. The wave of outrage it sparked had carried hope for justice on its crest, proving that change, though slow, was possible when people stood together. As twilight settled over the park, father and daughter held hands, looking toward tomorrow. The future remained unwritten, but they faced it with the strength of those who had learned that justice, though hard won, was worth the fight. This could be your child, your family, your story. Like, share, and subscribe now to help us fight for justice, because silence only protects the wrongdoers. Hit that bell and join thousands of voices demanding change.